Kevin, hey, congratulations on Receiver for yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's being showcased at the Beverly Hills Film Festival. How do you feel about that?
I feel great. It's they were a really supportive festival. I know that they had a lot of challenges this year, as let's be honest, just about every film festival has had in having to totally remake themselves into a virtual space. I know it's been difficult all around, but they were super supportive. Really helpful, really inviting, especially given that I'm not based in LA and not based in the States. So yeah, it was awesome. It was a lot of fun.
It's funny. I don't think I spoke to anybody in Los Angeles for that festival at this moment.
Oh, that's wild, because we did a couple of Zoom meetings, and I feel like during the introductory phase, now maybe this is just the problems with self-selection, right? But I feel during the little, let's everybody go around and introduce yourselves, where you're from. I feel like 90% of everybody who was on those Zoom meetings was all from LA. And I was like the lone voice from Canada saying, there's still snow outside where I am.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Well, I did check out your short filming, and it was very interesting. So tell us where the original idea, what sparked this for you to write this story?
Sure, absolutely. Well, as a little preamble, so Receiver follows Sriyani, a idealistic and overtaxed Sri Lankan-Canadian social worker, on a single terrible work night. You see, she's built her entire life around empathy and service to others, but pretty consistently at the expense of her own needs and her own desires. So the film asks the question, well, who's going to defend Sriyani tonight when she's confronted over the phone by an insidious caller with the mysterious power to control her mind? So where this comes from is a rather personal place for me. My then girlfriend, Stephanie, who is a social worker, was working as a telephone counselor at the time that Luke Higginson, my co-writer, and I were starting to conceptualize the film. So from having the chance to see and hear Steph's experiences around that time, I really got to see the level of emotional labor and empathy that was expected from both her employers and needed by her clients. Now, as Luke and I started to bat around those ideas, we had perhaps an unconventional reaction to them because it sort of started to scare us a little bit, in the sense that thinking about the implications of this, of what the work situation is like for modern social workers, really brought up a slate of sort of fears and dangers for us about the whole concept of the commodification of empathy, which is sort of the bedrock of modern social work. The more we commodify somebody's empathy, the more that empathy can be weaponized against them. And the more we talked about that idea, that was the stuff that started to scare us. And it became clear to us in feeling the level of attraction, something that was calling out to us about those concepts, that this film wanted to be a psychological horror film. And then when that genre sort of became clear, we sat down to thinking about, well, what is a comparable metaphor that we can use in the film as a way of talking around the idea of what we want to say about social work and about helper industries at large. And that's when we happened upon the idea of hypnosis, but specifically the hypnotic seduction community in all of its gross revelry. And we saw a lot of overlap there, because the whole thing about hypnosis is a successful hypnotic subject. There's got to be an amount of buy-in. There's got to be a level of emotional investment in the process that we really felt was comparable to what you see and what's expected of today's social workers.
Yeah, phone hypnosis is truly a scary thing, especially how you actually portrayed it, which you actually did manage to accomplish in a short film, which was probably one of the biggest challenges for yourself.
Well, making any short film in Canada these days is a challenge, because there's very little to no money available for it. But yeah, from a narrative standpoint, that was probably the part that took the most delicate amount of work. originally, of course, when we were scripting the thing, but then when I was sitting down to figure out, well, how am I going to direct this, knowing that I'm fundamentally making a film that's about one solitary character in a single room, how am I going to bring some sort of, theatrical paranoia to the to the endeavor? So yeah, that probably took a bit of noodling on my part, but I had a good team working with me, and I relied a lot in the development of the look of the film on my picture editor, who's also Luke Higginson, my co-writer on the film, and also my script supervisor.
Now, before I get into the, your special effects and whatnot of the rest of the film, first of all, tell us about the creepy voice behind behind that phone call.
Yeah, well, when we were figuring out who the caller was going to be, who this, and in a weird way, when we were writing the script, we were thinking of this character more as a sort of entity, because Drake is never seen. He's only ever heard on or off camera, I should say. And the whole thing about it is that makes it really suspect to what extent you can trust what he is telling Sriyani and therefore the audience. So we tried to think of him as an entity more than a character when we were writing him. But then, of course, when it came time for casting, you can't go into a film as a director saying, well, I'm going to cast an entity. No, you've got to think the full richness that you're going to try and unlock with any of these actors that you're testing out, to try and see who makes the best fit and makes the most interesting choices and has the actorly instrument that's most attuned to the useful direction for the film. And the funny thing about it was that David Tumpa, who is the performer who plays Drake, he actually came in for a different role. His agent sent him in to read for the detox worker role, which is early in the film and much smaller, obviously.
Yeah.
And we saw him, I think, on the first day that we were seeing actors for that role. And he had such an interesting take on that very, very small nugget of a character that I was elbowing Luke and our casting director in the session and saying, okay, ask him to hang around. I want to see him for Drake. So he sat out in the hallway and we gave him the sides and we were like, don't feel rushed. We're going to see another couple of people, but take your time. And in like 20 minutes to half an hour, when you feel ready, just give us a knock and let us know that you're ready to go. And he came in and he blew us away. He did, in that 20 minutes, it's like he somehow managed to do like 3 hours of preparation, and he was great. And I sort of knew from hearing him that he was probably going to be the guy, because he was just so attuned to the character, was bringing so many layers to a role he had literally just read. And then my big contention when it came time to make the film was that all of the off-screen actors, of which there are 3 in the film, Drake, the detox worker, and the agitated woman who Sriyani is dealing with on behalf of the detox worker. And I decided very early on that I wanted to have all of those performers in there on set performing live with Tahare, our lead actress. I didn't want to do the typical thing of just having the script supervisor read the off-camera sides and then bring in the actors separately and just have them record it, because, well, frankly, that's not the most interesting way of getting ultimately what amounts to very personal performances, regardless of how short the interactions are between all of these characters. So I fought really hard to make sure that we have the money and build in the time and the scheduling to do that. And it saw so many dividends, because I think it brought a huge amount of richness to the performances and the relationships, especially between Drake and Sriyani on set and on screen. But, if I can put my producing hat on for a second, it also saved us an incredible amount of money, because it extended our shooting schedule by a very, very small amount. Mm-hmm. Minuscule, I would say, but it basically eliminated all of our needs for any post-recording in a sound studio after the fact. And I mean, who's going to complain about savings on a short film? Because you never have enough money for those things.
That is true. I was going to ask you whether that was a voice, voice recorded separately or live, and you simply answered that. That is terrific. Now, speaking of casting, talk about your lead actress. How did you bring her on board? How did you discover her?
Well, there's a funny story about that because arguably I can't take credit for discovering her. That actually also has to go to my then girlfriend, Stephanie. So if you don't mind a quick anecdote. So about a year before we were casting the film, this would be around the time that Luke and I were still writing it. We were, about a year out from casting. There is a park, a rather sizable one called Withrow Park that's in my neighborhood here in Toronto. And it's one of the parks that's lucky enough to have a pretty regular Shakespeare in the Park troupe that performs there every season. And so there was a show that was being put on. I didn't know the troupe at that time because I just moved into the neighborhood. Steph found them online or something and said, "This is a fun thing. We should go and we should try it." And so we were sitting out there and enjoying the show. And in the opening introductory moments, and we'd already read through the cast list and stuff, she elbowed me and pointed to an actress in the program and said, "I'm pretty sure she's Indian. Wouldn't it be funny if you cast her in the film?" And we all laughed and had a gag about that. And I said, "Yeah, that would be funny, but seriously, you can't cast somebody in a modern role on the basis of seeing them perform Shakespeare. They're two very different kinds of performance to make each of those sort of things successful." We laughed and it was funny, and then we didn't think anything about it. And then a year later, we're casting. And the submissions come in, and my co-producers and I are going through them and seeing who's been submitted by their agents. And of course, it's a very specific casting call that we put out because it's specifically for South Asian actors, and the role is very specifically tailored to be Sri Lankan-Canadian in nature. So it's a pretty limited pool that we end up getting initially. And there's one name that I think sounds familiar, but I can't possibly place it. I don't think much of it until Tanare comes in on our very first day of casting, and it twigs she was the actress that we were joking around about a year before at the Shakespeare in the Park performance. And I thought that was funny, and she and I, swapped some chit chat, and I told her about that, and she was thrilled that I remembered her. And then I was like, "Oh, okay," and then we'll sit down and watch her, and she just absolutely blew us away. She had come in, and I discovered later, she had done so much prep on her own in terms of doing research into social work and research into the seduction community and stuff, all on her own, totally self-motivated. And she came in, unsurprisingly, like a theater actor with just it set. Now, not the performance set, but just her take on it, her sense of, this is what I'm bringing. These are the layers that I'm going to play with. And I love working with actors during casting in that, because those are the actors that you can throw some really, really difficult notes to, and they always have something interesting that comes back to it because they've already set up their own bedrock. So she was great. I threw her a couple of real doozies, and she bounced back from them like a champ and brought some really interesting stuff to play. So yeah, that was like the first day. We saw several good actresses that day, but she was the one who kind of stuck out. And after I think about 2 rounds of callbacks, it became very clear that it's like, this is who we're going to be going with. And she ended up being just a tremendous asset on the film. I think she takes what is, I would argue, although I'm biased, but a relatively interesting role on the page. And she just brought so much empathy and so much complexity to it. And I need to be clear, I don't think anybody should underestimate what a big job that was, because the entire film rests on her. She is the only actor that is featured on screen for 15 straight minutes. Largely uninterrupted, because the film is more or less structured as one continuous scene. And that's a lot of work. And she brought so much joy to the process and so much hard work that she created an environment on set that I constantly had to bring my A game to the table. And I love that, right? I don't think anybody goes into directing because they think it's easy or because they're going to have easier short days. But I love it when I can come to work and be like really productively challenged by my collaborators. And she was absolutely phenomenal in that department, and just forced me to be kind of my best self on set,
That's great. And could you address the length of your short film? Why 15 minutes? What did you plan it to be longer or shorter, or 15 minutes was perfect?
I think we sort of aimed for it to be around there. The reality is, when I first started making films about 20 years ago, the takeaway then, and bear in mind, 20 years ago, there were far fewer film festivals that were out there. And it was much more expensive to make a film because when I started, we were filming and cutting on film. This was before the days of that nonlinear editors had been popularized and were available. At a reasonable price. So the thing is, there were fewer films out there by and large and fewer film festivals. And the takeaway then was that the common rule of thumb was, if you're making a short and it's a short dramatic piece, obviously documentaries and experimental films have their own rules, but you should aim for it to be about 12 minutes long. That's kind of the ideal that doesn't immediately push away any sector of the festival industry, right? Because the longer you get, just the harder it becomes to program. So I think I've always kind of kept that in my head. And the script for Receiver was about 10 pages. So we knew we were aiming for it to be about 12 or so, but it's one of those things. There's a certain amount of flexibility there. So if it goes a little longer than my original aim, which was about 12, 13 minutes, then I'm fine with that if it makes the film better. If it's the right choice to lengthen a couple of moments and have there be a little more air between the characters, then that's A-okay. So I think it was aimed to be around that length, and we were pretty adamant in the editing room that we didn't want it to go over 15 with credits, because I feel like that's the cutoff when it comes in there for a lot of festivals, that they're going to start, like, if it's more than 15 minutes, they're going to start thinking and putting it in comparison immediately with, like, what are some great 10-minute films that we've got? How much better is this 16, 17-minute film than this 10-minute film, and those are conversations you don't really want to inspire right off the bat in a programming meeting. I mean, those considerations obviously happen at every film festival, but you want people to be looking for reasons to champion your film, not reasons to like let it pass on a technicality. Yeah. So I think the shorter and more efficient you can be, the better when you're making a short drama,
Well, that explains a lot. Well, let me get into a different tack, because I want to talk a little bit about spoilers, or how you actually handled it. So for those people who are watching and have not seen the short film, they could leave now. But anyways, I want to talk about two special effects that you actually brought onto this. First of all, talk about the doppelganger that or I don't know what you actually wanted to call it in your film.
Well, that character was known as the double throughout production, and that's how we referred to the character in the original script. So the whole trick of that was, we knew we were going to need a certain amount of motion control photography, but for anybody who's ever shot with motion control, and I've worked with motion control on bigger shows, commercials, things like that, stuff that I've been working in lighting design on and things through the years. And the whole trick about motion control is, no matter how well prepared you are, no matter how much of the crew has experience with motion control, it kills your day. It just always kills your day. There is no way to properly get your day when you're doing motion control, ever, even when you have as much money as your film form needs. So I knew I was going to need a bit of it, but I had said from the very beginning, I want to do as little of this as possible because we just don't have the time. Mm-hmm. So knowing that going into it, I felt like the strongest strategy was going to be to figure out how to do as much of it as possible using the oldest special effect known to cinema, which is actors. So I'm acquainted with some people who worked on Orphan Black, if you're familiar with that television show. It was shot in Toronto, and as anybody who's familiar with it knows, the whole conceit behind that is that the main character who's played by Tatiana Maslany, is playing a series of different clones throughout the entire show. So I talked to as many people as I could get who I knew who worked on the production of that to talk about, well, how did you do it? How did it work on set? What were the things that worked? What didn't work? And the common consensus from pretty much anybody who was there at the production side of things was you have to work with a performance double. You've got to work with somebody who is another actor who is going to be able to both double for the character on screen. So for instance, if you're doing what we might call like a dirty single on a two shot, right? You have two characters facing each other. You have one who's facing the camera, who's the topic, and then you see, for instance, the shoulder and side of the head of the other one kind of dirty off to the side of the frame. Well, if you have Sriyani and her double facing each other, and you've got to do, a single of Sriyani, and then you have to turn around and do a single of the double, and you want the opposite character dirty in the frame, then you've got to have the performance double playing the back of the head and the shoulder, right? But the other advantage of having a performance double is you then have another actor who can be working in rehearsals with your main actor to figure out the physicality and the nature of how both of these characters are going to move so that these characters move in a way that does not seem familiar. So you're not exclusively asking one actor to constantly be flipping sides and remembering, well, what should my body language be like for this character? What should it be for this one? Because they basically have a partner who is constantly going to be helping them gauge, well, like, what should the interaction between our body movement be? And so even if the performance double is not in camera at any given moment, she or he is there as we're doing technical rehearsals and things like that, just as an assistant in many ways to help ground the performance that the main character is doing. And we had a phenomenal performance double, Mina James for Tahare, who played Tahare's opposite in every scene that we needed to see both characters in the frame. And that was great. And what that meant was that allowed me to sort of tailor all of my shots in such a way, knowing that I was going to be working with two really, really strong physical performers who had been in rehearsals already for 3 days leading up to production, playing around with who are these characters and what does the double know about Sriyani's life that Sriyani doesn't know, and vice versa, and things. And so it meant that I could shrink everything down into one single motion control shot. And that made Cavan Campbell, the producer, very, very happy. So yeah, the trick was, it's a line I've already said in this answer, but I used the oldest and I would argue the greatest special effect we've still got, which is good performers,
Well, you got to love movie magic. And the other movie magic you probably could guess that I'm going to ask about is the coffee beans.
Yeah.
So tell us what that trick was. Was it CGI? Was it stop motion? What? Obviously, it's not a double.
Well, it sort of was. So it was all of those things kind of put together in different layers. How we had to do the moving coffee bean effects was that for any shot that we were showing them, we had our set decoration team dressing to camera. We had worked out the geometry of roughly the humanoid shape that the beans were going to be in at any given time, and had it worked out what it was going to look like and how the different angles were going to look. So we had geometry and we had a shape and a size that we could give to the set dressers. They dressed it at every turn with actual coffee beans to shot for all of the shots where we're seeing it. And then when we got into post, our lead animator and our VFX supervisor, Stephen Curran, did painstaking animation of every single coffee bean that you see in there, so we could then overlay the actual coffee beans that were filmed on set with many, many more to grow the sense of how many coffee beans were part of this sort of moving humanoid shadow on the floor. And then he would animate them so we could see the movement of the head, and the sort of breathing effect of the beans, and so we could actually sort of motivate the performance of the beans, which is supposed to be one of the initial physical manifestations of the double before it manifests in physical form.
Well, you know what? That's why you get paid the big bucks here.
Wait, I'm sorry. Was I supposed to get paid for this film? Because all I remember was me having to sign a lot of checks, and I don't remember any of them being addressed to me on that.
The life of a filmmaker, but
yeah.
but here's an important question. Well, I guess it's an important question to you because I looked at your filmography. You have a few short films, but what's very impressive is that you have worked on very, very notable projects over the years. When are you going to do a full-length feature film?
Here's the secret. I've been trying for 5 years. It is very difficult to get funding for things in this country. You know, the whole trick of it is, especially in a city like Toronto, which has a giant sort of service industry when it comes to film and television. Meaning, for people who aren't familiar with that concept, that the large majority of the films and television projects that are made here are all American productions that come up here to shoot, and oftentimes they come up here primarily to save money. Although they can save money, and we've got very, very experienced and really solid production crews up here. So the thing is, most filmmakers I know have a side gig and do what I do. Not necessarily working in lighting design like I do, but a lot of people I know who make films, you know, to pay the bills and to pay the mortgage, they work on American pictures as often as they can. And, you know, we'll spend 6 months doing that, and then the rest of the year working on their own stuff. That's unfortunately just a reality of how things kind of work in Canada, because I mean, the only filmmakers that exist in Canada are independent filmmakers. We do not have a studio system like exists in the States. And so to be making films in Canada means to be an independent filmmaker by its very nature. There's just different layers of independent filmmaking. And the unfortunate thing is there's not a lot of money for anybody right now. Mm-hmm. So it's, you know, and it's very difficult to get features made. And there's a pretty, if I'm being perfectly honest, there's a very limited number of fiction features that get made in this country every year because of the fact that there's so little money. And the reality is, even if you get the money, and I see this from both sides because I work as a technician on bigger shows, as well as working as a producer on independent stuff. And even if you get the money, you have to plan when in the season you're going to make your film, just so you can try and get an experienced crew. And that's getting harder and harder the busier we get in the city. As it is right now, like, I'm a member of IATSE, and as it is right now, we're operating, I think, at something like 140% of membership constantly at this point. We have something like 24 different shows in production right now. And this is not, it's not summer yet, so this isn't even our busy season yet, you know? So the struggle is, even when you get the money to make a short or make a feature, it sometimes takes months just to assemble a crew and try and dance everybody's schedules around themselves. Because you're constantly in competition with shows that have a lot more money because they're bringing American dollars and are getting an extra 30% over us when they step across the border because of the exchange rate, you know? So yeah, it's a very difficult time to be a filmmaker in this country, unfortunately.
Well, that's okay. You know, one day it'll happen. It happens with every filmmaker.
Oh, absolutely. And to be clear, I'm not worried about that. The goal is just to continue developing things. I mean, Luke and I are actually developing a feature adaptation of Receiver at this point right now, and are in the process, the very beginning stages of just starting to pitch it to some production companies right now. So the hope is in the next year or two that we'll be able to get that off the ground, because I think there'd be a wonderful symmetry to the first feature I direct being an adaptation of Receiver.
Excellent. Let's hope so. Let me leave with one more thought here. I know I've taken a lot of your time here.
No, not at all.
Obviously, we're speaking in, via Zoom, which gives us an opportunity to speak internationally. Otherwise, we will be talking at the Beverly Hills Film Festival. But how are you staying sane and creative during this time while the world goes bonkers?
First, I must say thank you for taking the big leap and making the assumption that I am still sane. I think the real answer is any way you can. I mean, I feel like that probably sounds like a bit of a cop-out and perhaps just slightly defeatist. But the reality is, it's literally about doing anything you can. I mean, for me, the last 8 months, I've been working nonstop. I just finished up, like an 8-9 month stretch on the fourth season of Star Trek Discovery. So that's been a necessity. It's been 6 days a week, basically. So you kind of have to stay sane for the sake of that. But then in my evenings and in the weekends, Luke and I have been working on the development of the Receiver feature. There's another feature that I'm developing solo, another chamber horror film entitled Afraid All Kinds that I've been working on in the fall and began pitching in the winter. So, I mean, the funny thing about it is that, and not to suggest that lockdowns and a pandemic are in any way funny. There's obviously a huge amount of struggles that everybody's having both personally and professionally right now. But the strange thing about it is that I feel in a weird way that independent filmmakers are kind of ideally sort of suited to dealing with this sort of social privation. Because by default, to be successful in an industry that demands a whole lot from you and is very, very difficult to navigate for even the best and the busiest of us, you end up having to have a huge amount of apples in the air, right? You're constantly juggling multiple projects because inevitably, you've got five apples, 5 oranges, take your pick of metaphor, up in the air. A couple of them are going to come down rotten in your hands over the course of a year. So even when you're not in a pandemic, the goal is, well, how do you keep yourself sane any way you can? You have a couple of projects that you can constantly be bouncing around between to try and lead to some creative cross-pollination in your own work as you're at different development and production stages with different projects. And I think by and large, that's been the way it's had to work this last year as we've been in various stages of lockdown and social isolation, that you find a way of creatively cross-pollinating between whatever can keep your interest and keep you grounded this week. And maybe what did it for me this week is going to be, starting a polish of Afraid All Kinds. And maybe that's not going to be what's going to keep me sane next week. So maybe next week I bounce back to Receiver, or I bounce back to something else, or maybe I bounce back to spending a week in my free time doing nothing but just watching old movies from the 90s and silly action adventure things that I don't have to think very much about. There were a bunch of weeks in the last year that has been my productive exercise when I get back from set, so.
Well, you know what? That's a great answer. In either way, whatever works. Well,
That's
Cavan,
the hope, anyway.
Hey, congratulations once again for Receiver at the Beverly Hills Film Festival. And hey, thank you for speaking to us about your short film, and please stay creative. And I look forward to more short films and hopefully, crossing fingers, your first feature.
Thank you. And just before I go, just for any of your listeners out there who are looking to track me down, because unfortunately now the Beverly Hills Film Festival just finished this week. So anybody who's looking to follow me can follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Interlock Pictures. Which is the name of my production company. The website is www.interlockpictures, all one word.com. And for anybody who's looking to interact with my personal noodlings on politics and life and the industry, you can find me on Twitter at CCamOperator. So I'm there, and those are usually the forums through which I announce the upcoming screenings that we've got for Receiver and some other cool things that are going to be coming along in the next couple of months.
That's right. Do follow Cavan here, and just don't ask him for spoilers for Star Trek Discovery. That's all we know.
I'm still covered under my season 4 NDA, so I'd have to be very coy about anybody who wants to ask me about that.
Excellent. Well, anyways, hey, next time, all right?
I think so. We should probably be safe when season 4 starts airing. I think at that point we can talk.
That's right. That's right. Well, we'll catch up again, and we'll definitely talk again.
That'd be great. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. Bye now.
All right. See ya.